Hello and welcome. I am Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching News Night on DD India, your prime-time destination for news and analysis. It's good to see you again this Friday evening. Now it's 9 p.m. in New Delhi, 11:30 in the morning in Washington, D.C. and 8 in the evening in Kabul. Now on the show tonight, a humanitarian crisis of catastrophic proportion is unfolding in Afghanistan as the Taliban captures more territory. Now, India says the future of Afghanistan cannot be its past, but the fear is Afghanistan may be looking at a return to the Afghanistan of old, when systematic oppression of women and girls was the order of the day. Executions were all too common, and suppression of freedom of religion, expression, and even girls' education was rampant. So, where is Afghanistan headed? At what cost? At whose expense? We discuss all that and much more coming up over the next 1 hour. But first, as always, the headlines. The situation in Afghanistan worsens. Taliban makes new inroads into population centers and seizes more territory. Afghanistan's second largest city, Kandahar, falls to the Taliban. The US and UK to send troops to aid civilian evacuations. Thousands of people displaced in Afghanistan, many head to Kabul. The United States urges Afghanistan's neighbors to keep borders open as the number of civilians fleeing the Taliban onslaught swells. Pakistan closes key Chaman Spin Boldak border crossing with Afghanistan. Prime Minister Narendra Modi launches national vehicle scrapping policy at Investor Summit in Gujarat. People with a scrapping certificate will not have to pay for registration of a new vehicle. Policy to bring in a fresh investment of more than 10,000 crore rupees and create an estimated 35,000 jobs. First COVID-19 nasal vaccine developed by Bharat Biotech gets regulators' nod for holding phases 2 and 3 clinical trials. Phase 1 trials for ages groups between 18 and 60 years are complete. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh flags off nationwide events as part of the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav to mark the 75th anniversary of India's independence. Says India aims to develop a powerful, self-reliant and peace-loving nation capable of giving a befitting reply whenever challenged. Sport Minister Anurag Singh Thakur launches Fit India Freedom Run 2.0 to celebrate 75 years of Indian independence. Runs to be organized in nearly 75 villages across 750 districts throughout the country. The minister says a youthful mind, body and soul is the key driver of a healthy and fit India. Fit India Freedom Run also held at 75 other locations across the country, including iconic locations such as Cellular Jail in Port Blair, Khaza Post in Lahore Spiti, Mumbai's Gateway of India and the Atari border in Punjab. Situation eases after landslide blocks river Chandrabhaga in Lahore Spiti, forming a barrier lake. Over 2,000 people evacuated from 12 villages. Himachal Pradesh Chief Minister dispatches a high-level team to assess the situation, urges villagers to stay away from the area. And the death toll in Turkey flash floods rises to 27. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visits the Kastamonu province in Black Sea region, declares 3 provinces as disaster hit, says government will swiftly rebuild the flooded areas. Right, let me dive straight into our cover story. The United Nations warns that a Taliban offensive would have a quote-unquote catastrophic impact on civilians. What's worse, that there is little or no hope of peace talks to end the fighting, with the Taliban apparently set on a military victory. Taliban tightened its grip on Afghanistan on Friday, wresting control of the second and third biggest cities of Kandahar and Herat. Now, the speed of the offensive, as U.S. forces prepare to complete their withdrawal by the end of this month, has raised anxieties in some world capitals. Here's a comprehensive report.
A humanitarian crisis is unfolding in Afghanistan, and it poses as big a challenge as the rapid advance of the Taliban across the war-torn country. Scores of Afghans have fled their homes as Taliban insurgents sweep through the country, taking control of provincial capitals. Over 400,000 people have been internally displaced, leaving 18 million in need of humanitarian assistance.
The Secretary-General is following with deep concern developments in Afghanistan, including the latest fighting in Herat and Kandahar. We are particularly concerned about the shift of fighting to urban areas, with the potential for civilian harm being even greater. We are not blind to the suffering of the civilians who are caught in crossfire in urban environments.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke to Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and discussed the current security situation in the country. Blinken also affirmed that the U.S. is committed to supporting a diplomatic solution to the conflict and enduring partnership with the Afghan people. The United States says it will reduce the number of staff at its embassy in Kabul and is sending 3,000 extra troops to help evacuate U.S. embassy staff.
We are further reducing our civilian footprint in Kabul in light of the evolving security situation. We expect to draw down to a core diplomatic presence in Afghanistan in the coming weeks.
To enable this safe, orderly reduction, the Secretary of Defense has directed the Department to position temporary capabilities to ensure the safety and security of U.S. and partner civilian personnel. I'm going to break this down for you just real quick. The first movement will consist of 3 infantry battalions that are currently in the Central Command area of responsibility. They will move to Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul within the next 24 to 48 hours.
UK has also announced that it will send around 600 troops to Afghanistan to carry out an emergency airlift of civilians. Britain's Defence Minister Ben Wallace says Afghanistan was spiralling into a failed state and civil war in which groups such as Al-Qaeda would thrive and likely pose a threat to the West again.
Led by warlords and led by different provinces and tribes, and you end up, if you're not very careful, in a civil war. And I think we're heading towards a civil war, initially shown by a Taliban with momentum.
The capture of Kandahar and Herat, the second and third largest cities in Afghanistan, represents the Taliban's 2 biggest military victories since they began a broad offensive in May. Bureau Report, DD India.
The United Nations says Afghanistan is on the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe. Now, more than 250,000 people have been forced from their homes since the month of May. The UN Refugee Agency has called on Afghanistan's neighbors to keep their borders open. More in the next report.
Since the US foreign forces leaving Afghanistan by this month, Taliban insurgents captured most part of the country and advancing towards major cities after taking control of Kandahar and Ghazni, 150 kilometers from capital Kabul, and rendering tens of thousands homeless. Some have been forced to migrate, while others are fleeing out of fear and hunger. UN agencies on Friday warned of a humanitarian catastrophe in Afghanistan as Taliban insurgent advances heightened the country's crisis.
We fear the West is yet to come, and a larger tide of hunger is fast approaching. It's no longer a secret the situation has worsened and is becoming increasingly unpredictable. The conflict has accelerated much faster than we all anticipated, and the situation has all the hallmarks of a humanitarian catastrophe.
More than 250,000 people have been forced from their home since May, 80% of whom are women and children. Many of them reported extortion by armed groups and having to dodge IEDs along major roads.
Displaced civilians are talking about extortion by non-state armed groups, the presence of improvised explosive devices on major roads, and also, just generally rising insecurity. But we're also seeing the number of civilian casualties really spiraling alarmingly, and an increasing proportion of women and children are among those that are targeted. So it's a very dire situation.
UNHRC called on Afghanistan's neighbors to keep their borders open as Taliban insurgent advances heightened the country's crisis.
UNHCR is calling on neighbouring countries to keep their borders open in light of the intensifying crisis in Afghanistan. An inability to seek safety may risk innumerable civilian lives.
But the closest neighbor, Pakistan, has shut the door in the time of massive humanitarian crisis. Pakistani forces clashed with hundreds of Afghans stranded on Pakistan's side of a commercially vital border crossing with Afghanistan. The landlocked Chaman-Sping border crossing is Afghanistan's second busiest entry point and a main commercial artery to the Pakistani sea coast. Bureau Report, DD India.
Right, time now for our In Focus segment, in which we are discussing about Afghans flee for safety as Taliban captures more cities. And joining me are Mr. Vivek Karju and Mr. Kamar Aga. Mr. Karju is a former Indian ambassador to Afghanistan, and Mr. Kamar Aga is a senior journalist and strategic affairs analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to News Night. Ambassador Karju, if I can come to you first. Now, we are, 18 days away from Biden's self-imposed deadline of 31st August to pull out all his troops from Afghanistan. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, given what is happening on the ground in Afghanistan tonight as we speak, in your estimation, Ambassador Karju, do you think the U.S. has erred, one, by talking to Taliban, two, without involving or taking the legitimately elected government of Afghanistan into confidence, and three, relying on intermediaries, some would say dubious intermediaries, such as Pakistan, in the last several months now?
Your first question, what choice did the Americans have? The situation in Afghanistan was that of a stalemate. After 2016, it was obvious that the Americans had been there by then for 15 years, and unless they decided to move the war into Pakistan, they would not be able to quell the Taliban insurgency. Please recall that in 2010, President Obama had ordered a surge when they had pushed in 100,000 troops. So you can't fight a defensive war.
Okay.
If there are sanctuaries for an insurgency in a neighboring state, unless those sanctuaries are demolished, the insurgency would be replenished continuously and would continue. So the Americans decided quite clearly by 2017 that they had no alternative but to accept a strategic retreat and a strategic defeat and move on. Great powers do this. If they get involved in getting caught in a quagmire, then history shows they accept that there's been mistakes made, but they move on. You can't get stuck, as President Biden said, in a forever war. Second, in the situation that obtained, the Kabul government, to my mind, had made major mistakes. In particular, President Karzai and President Ghani did not really combat the Taliban ideology. The Pashtun elite, in particular, stuck to Kabul. They did not move around in the Pashtun heartland as much as they should have to really combat the pernicious ideology of the Taliban and to restore some balance in Pashtun society. They did not do that, and we know the results. Now, as far as Pakistan is concerned, if the sanctuaries were in Pakistan and the Americans had decided that they will not enter Pakistani territory to clean up these sanctuaries, despite all the loud and the brave noises and the pressures they had put on the Pakistanis, what choice did they have? So I believe that realism must guide our estimation of these events and of the situation. And now the Americans, in their sovereign interest, their national interest, decided, as I said, that they must move on. Otherwise, what was the alternative? As Biden told his people, what is the alternative? Do we remain stuck in Afghanistan in such a situation as it, with a holding operation forever? And he said no. And as there are indications, while people are unhappy, some sections of American opinion is unhappy at the results of the withdrawal, I don't think anyone in America is really complaining about the fact of withdrawal. Yes, there may be complaints about the manner in which it has been done, but not that withdrawal per se was wrong. I think this is the realistic position.
But Ambassador Kaju, would Biden or would many a world capital around the world have anticipated what is happening in Afghanistan as we speak? Was this not factored in?
I would really think that the Americans had created an army which was fashioned in the image of their own forces. I feel that they did not take into account, now one has the benefit of hindsight obviously, but they did not take into account the nature of war fighting which is traditional to Afghanistan. And we are seeing that nature of war fighting today. If you go through Afghan history, very rarely, if at all, do you come across major pitched battle. Generally, if one side has the momentum, the other side caves in. And that is what we are seeing today. So there was in world capitals an idea that a modern army had been created and it would fight in a modern way. But within this army, there was an excellent force of around 40 to 60,000 special forces who moved around. But the rest of the army, well, we see the results.
Right.
So you judge the army by the results, and that is what Biden also said recently. He said, look, we've created this force.
Fair enough.
And now it's for the Kabul people, the Kabul authorities, the Afghan government to really use it.
Right. Mr. Aga, I want to draw your attention to the just concluded peace talks in Doha, where some countries, 12, last I checked, wanted to give diplomacy a chance, and those 12 countries included the US, Russia, China, and India as well. Now, we've heard from these 12 countries in a joint statement saying we will not recognize a government formed by the Taliban by force. Fair enough. But we've not heard from some key West Asian countries such as Saudi Arabia or the UAE for that matter, two countries that recognized the Taliban government in the 90s. So can you help our viewers understand what could these two countries of West Asia as a whole do vis-a-vis Afghanistan in the next few weeks?
You see, as far as Saudi Arabia and UAE are concerned, they will not come out openly against the Taliban. They had recognized Taliban earlier, they had dealings, they have funded Taliban. Both of them, maintains, especially their religious organization based in these two countries, very high-level contacts with them. And I don't think they will go against Taliban. In fact, they don't like democratic setup in any of the Islamic countries. They prefer religious organization or religious movement, Sharia-based government. They call it hukumat of that nature. They in fact spend billions of dollars, in a number of countries to suppress democratic movement in Islamic countries. So I don't think they will come out openly, against. And Taliban are not against the Saudis. Taliban are not against the UAE. In fact, Taliban were promising Americans that they will establish a Saudi sort of Islamic structure or setup in Afghanistan, which will deal with other countries also, which will take concern of the Indian concern also they will address, But Americans have failed to understand the Taliban, their nature of Taliban, they are basically, Pakistan's proxy, and secondly, they are basically, a force which is highly indisciplined, Mullah Umar's group, Mullah Brother may be promising that sort of a setup, but there are many other groups within Taliban. Taliban is not a monolithic force. There are a number of groups, they are, like behaving like a warlords, trying to capture areas, trying to maintain their hold over, especially, over the minerals rich regions, and they exactly behaving. This is what actually Pakistan wanted. Pakistan never wanted a very peaceful Afghanistan. Peaceful Afghanistan means they will promote Afghan national interest. They will not take care of Pakistan's interest in Afghanistan. So they wanted that way, And I don't think Arab countries are going to speak much or taking. Doha, yes, Doha is taking interest, and they are in fact trying to solve this problem. But Pakistan, Afghanistan, both, the problem is not in Afghanistan. Problem is in Pakistan. Americans should have imposed sanction. At least now they should impose sanction on Pakistan.
Point taken, Mr. Aga. Indeed. Ambassador Karju, I have just over a minute left on the discussion. So very quickly, if you don't mind, a couple of questions. One, is civil war imminent in your estimation? And two, if that is true, what will that mean for humanitarian catastrophe that the UN is warning about?
If you look at the Taliban advance over the last, say, week or so, then they seem to be just rolling over all the opposition. And today, they are not in Mazar. Mazar is holding out. Kabul, they've encircled Kabul. Kabul is holding out. They haven't gotten to Hazarajat. But pretty much all the rest of the country is within their sway. So a civil war assumes that there will be groups who will be willing to fight. And I think that there is still a slim chance. It's getting slimmer by the day, but there is still a slim chance that the Taliban would agree to some kind of a negotiation. But as I said, it's getting slimmer by the day. Now, as far as the solidarity of the international community is concerned, apart from the Saudis and the UAE, my fear is that the 12 countries who have pledged that they will not recognize a government established by military force is good. But will the Russians and the Chinese, and for that matter the Iranians, hold out if push comes to shove? Or will they fall to the blandishment which the Taliban have offered, that they will not give sanctuaries to groups that target Russia and China? So we've got to be very realistic there too. As far as the humanitarian crisis is concerned, yes, of course, the humanitarian crisis is very tragic. I think the UN agencies are correctly worried, and they've rightly asked neighboring countries to open their gates to let in refugees, and it's shameful that Pakistan is not doing so. Pakistan, which has created in very large measure this problem, is not willing to really allow Afghans now who are suffering from a problem that it has created to come into their territory. But then, if you look at history again, humanitarian crises are the accompaniment of conflict. That is the tragic fact.
That is indeed a tragic turn of events. Ambassador Karju, Mr. Aga, thank you so much for sharing your insights with our viewers here on Newsnight tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you. Moving on, India on Friday launched a vehicle scrappage policy. Now, vehicle scrapping will help phase out unfit and polluting vehicles in an environment-friendly manner. It's a significant milestone in India's development journey. Now, Prime Minister Modi told an investor summit in Gujarat that his government's aim is to create a viable circular economy and bring value for all stakeholders